About a year ago, I did a video on Laura Dayton and how she seems to be one of the most hated guest characters on the show. I've been wanting to also do a video on the man whose storyline intersects with hers and who leaves the show exactly when she does. So let's talk about Will Cartwright. Specifically, whether or not his character would have managed a permanent stay on the Ponderosa. For many, and maybe even most fans, when we think about characters who were brought in to replace Adam, we think of Candy. And that's for good reason. Candy actually does replace Adam after Pernell Roberts leaves the show for good in season 6. What some might not realize, though, is that Pernell had been talking about making an exit early on, and the introduction of the so-called fifth Cartwright was initially intended as his replacement, and if you believe some of the stories out there, was only brought in while Pernell was still a part of the cast in order to make him rethink his departure plans. One might say that it kind of worked, but only temporarily, because he did actually ride off the Ponderosa for the last time the following season right after Will leaves for good, too. There are articles out there which state that Guy Williams, who played Will, did not like being what amounts to a threat against Pernell, and that was why he decided not to stay on the show permanently. You can also find stories which state that Michael Landon wasn't fond of his presence there, because he felt insecure about his fan base liking the new edition more, but I personally feel less inclined to believe that one. I will only say that, if that is the case, Mike had nothing to worry about. He was little Joe Cartwright. Nobody was ever going to outshine him, especially not someone new. For the purposes of this video, I'm not going to talk about Pernell leaving or anything about the actors personally. I will instead focus on the character and how he might have fit into the show based on the storyline and what we had to work with as far as what we got, because presumably what he started off as was what we would have continued to see, hopefully with some more character growth, because they had been considering keeping him at least up until they put him with Laura in the final 2 episodes in which they appeared. So here's the thing. I want to talk about where that went wrong from the perspective of the fans watching the show. Just like with Laura, if they wanted us to see him possibly being a permanent fixture of the landscape, they messed themselves up a bit right from the word go. To explain what I mean, let's get some context. Will Cartwright first appeared in the season 5 episode Return to Honor. Ben is called to another town because a young man with his name is assumed to have been killed in a robbery. When Ben arrives to retrieve the body of his late brother's only son, he finds that Will killed a man who was gunning for him and put his own identification on the body to throw the men looking for him off the scent long enough to disappear. He was also hit in the gunfight, though, so when he finds his Uncle Ben at the grave of the wrong man, he quickly passes out. Ben gets him medical help and takes him back to the ranch. As you might expect, the boys are a little wary of this cousin who was wanted by a man making counterfeit money, from whom Will stole the engraving plates. Will goes through an inner crisis about whether or not to turn in the plates. With the help and influence of his new family, he decides to not only do the right thing, but to stay on the ranch just to see if family life will suit him going forward. So okay, not a bad start. It makes sense that he might question his place in a new life so totally different from the one he's used to. Here's where my problem starts, though. In the next episode he's in, titled The Roper, he's considering leaving because he doesn't fit in. He's just about to simply take off without so much as a goodbye when he's taken hostage by a band of outlaws. He goes on a pretty entertaining adventure, and he's saved by the family in the end. The family bands together to save him like they would for any of the others. He decides to stay a little longer. We see him next in the Compañeros, where an old friend arrives and tries to get him to leave with him and go to Mexico to fight in a rebellion. And he tells Ben that he wants to go because he owes this man his life, but also that he's not fitting in with them anyway. Again. See, so by now is when it gets a little tedious. We're now on the 3rd episode of his, and he's talked about leaving in every single one. Maybe not as much as in the last one, but it's still there in this one. By the end, he's convinced to stay, but it just feels like we've done this before. It's bad enough to keep recycling a plotline, but to keep doing it with the same character is just wrong. At this point is where he intersects with Laura. The Pressure Game is the first of a two-parter which concludes with both of their storylines wrapping up. He meets Laura and they have sparks right away. We are again treated to him talking about leaving as he is offered a job in San Francisco. In this first episode, it's his wanderlust again which prompts him to consider leaving. In the second episode, and final appearance for him, Triangle, he decides to take the job because he's in love with Laura and can't have her because she's engaged to Adam, who is now in a wheelchair because the two startled him in the middle of building a house for her when they come to tell him that they're in love and he's out of luck. Okay, apologies for the use of a line from a 90s Rhett Akins song, but there was just nothing I could do. I couldn't help it. I actually, full disclosure, did a video with that song like 100 years ago. I'll link it in the description if you're interested. So this time he does leave, and it really isn't the greatest way to exit because he's going down the road when Laura stops him because Adam has just done a presto recovery and they can be together now. He stops long enough to pick her up and the two leave for good. He doesn't look back, doesn't say a word to his cousin who just started magically walking again and making it possible for him to be with the woman he loves. We're told they stay in Virginia City, so we can assume they spoke again off screen, but that's it. One could argue that we don't see it, so it doesn't count. To sum it all up, Will had potential. They just wasted it. They had him trying to leave every episode we saw to the point where the fairly good plot points surrounding his desire to leave are overshadowed by his constant whining that he wasn't a Cartwright like the other Cartwrights. In the end, he only serves as a foil for the dumpster fire of a relationship between Laura and Adam, something that, if given enough time, would have ended anyway. So I don't think that the way it went down was simply due to Guy wanting out or Pennell staying in a little while longer, or even that the fans didn't want Adam married. I think it was doomed from the start simply by a mismanaged plot. To prove my point, I would go the way of all fans who are disappointed by the way a thing ends, and make a long video about it. Oh. Wait. That's what this is. Okay. Plan 2. I'll go the second route and do some fanfiction. I would leave the Roper alone for the most part because it's a solid episode and it doesn't hurt too much for him to complain about not fitting in for that one episode, so long as he learns his lesson by the end and doesn't threaten to leave again until he meets and falls for Laura. If he even does. You'll understand what I mean in a minute. So where does that put the Companeros? He leaves with his old friend out of a sense of loyalty despite Ben's objections. That part makes sense. One thing that I would change, though, is to have him brought back by having to save one of his cousins. Maybe Joe follows along to convince him to come back and is almost killed. Will saves him. That makes him feel more like one of the family because they aren't just saving him all the time. He's part of the all-for-one, one-for-all group. You could add in another episode just for that if you think it's too much with the other storyline already going on in this one. But if you want to keep the number of episodes the same, you can just fit it in right here. Now with the two-parter storyline. There's two ways to go about this. One where he stays, and one where he goes. One where he stays is simply to give Pennell what he wanted. Adam gets married to someone other than Laura, who he actually has chemistry with. Will stays on, and is in every episode going forward, whereas Adam is only in a few here and there, because he has his own life with his own family. We get to keep Will and Adam, and it doesn't feel overcrowded. And as a bonus, Pennell gets time off to do other things like his passion for theater. In the scenario where Will leaves for good, the girl from the Roper, Emma, returns and they fall in love, because they had really great chemistry when they met before. Will marries her, and they leave together for him to take the job offer in San Francisco. Since we never see him again anyway, there's no need to keep him in town. Also, by omitting Laura Dayton, besides her not being a great character to begin with, you don't have any conflict between him and Adam, because as it stands, they don't take enough time to explore it anyway. So yes, in my rewrites, Laura and Will don't end up together. That isn't because I think they're a bad couple. I really don't. I just think it fills some plot holes and prevents some crappy writing to just take her out altogether. In that case, we can still have her and Peggy as characters, we just won't see them again after the cheating game. Okay, so since I put the work in, If you watch this all the way through, you know that I do not dislike Will as a character. I actually really like him, and I think that Guy Williams is charming enough to be a great Cartwright. I just don't think they did a good enough job with him while they had him. So that's how I would fix things. What do you think? Do you like Will? How would you have changed his storyline over the episodes he was in? And yes, I do also notice he's not in any of the connecting episodes that aired between the ones he was in. I guess he was just hiding in the kitchen for those. Feel free to fill the comment section up with some scenarios where Will went during those episodes between his storyline. I expect to be entertained here, so give me your wackiest answers only.